Hi, Kearney here at Powell and I'm standing with the incredible Heather Diacont Rinehart. And Heather is going to be in our juried show. And Heather, will you please introduce us to your piece?
Yes, hello. This is Green Heron in Flux, and it's an acrylic painting. And it's showing this lovely little bird kind of hanging out on a pylon, I guess, from a pier. Mm-hmm. And this was actually inspired by something that I observed on one of my visits to the Chesapeake Bay region, where the birding is exceptional. And I watched this guy for a really long time, and he was so still. And then he wasn't. And there was just this flight of activity. And I really love observing the way that these particular birds do their thing. So patient, very colorful.
Yeah, and this is obviously a extremely colorful piece. Like you always have such a great use of color.
Thank you.
And one of the things that when you're close, and I'm sure you can see on the video, but it's even more pronounced in person, is I love the way that you've not shadow, the opposite of shadow. You've drawn the bird here and his wings flying up so that he can take flight. And I like the way that you've sectioned out the areas so that it almost feels like time is moving around him. Can you talk about how you thought about, that's very interesting in the composition because you have, you're basically painting multiple perspectives all at once. Can you talk about how you thought about that in your composition?
I can try, but yeah, you're right on about what I'm thinking about. There's so much overlap in just moments that means something to me when I'm watching anything in nature. Mm-hmm. And to try and coalesce that into a single piece of art is really a challenge that I like to try and rise to. So it's not just the movement of the bird. You see him still, and you see him in that moment where he's catching a fish and there's a flutter.
Yeah, you can see the fish and the little fish down here.
Yeah, and those are just to kind of represent what this environment is all about, what this ecosystem is about. But I also like playing with, different kind of color palettes that are happening at different times of day.
Yeah.
And maybe even different seasons.
Yeah, so we have warmer and cooler palettes and everything in between.
Yeah, and those colors, they really, complementary colors, you put them, you butt them up against each other and you get this whole other punch that can be a little unwieldy, but I like trying to rein that in and make it something.
One of the things that I really appreciated when I looked at this piece is your use of, on the one hand, stillness, and on the other hand, cubism, to go and show us, that next dimension. We always think of paintings as being two-dimensional, and you can build up paint to make it three-dimensional, but you've brought in that fourth dimension of time and space. So part of that is not only how you have centered us with the bird still, but also moving. So do you think about art history or these different ways of communicating?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Everything I do is kind of informed by paintings that I've seen and people who have come before me. And thinking about Duchamp.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The new Descending the Staircase was something that I tangled with in high school. Mm-hmm. And I hated it. But but I find it's still this piece of work that I keep going back to, and it's so interesting because the forms are there, but there's this dimension of time that's being shown. And I studied animation in school.
Oh yeah.
So I think some of that plays into the work that I do also. But I'm definitely interested in kind of coalescing different moments on the canvas and unifying.
But you centered us with the bird, making him very still and pronounced, and then all this is moving around, which is in a multiverse.
Which I was going to say too. And his still, what's funny about animals is they can be so much more still for longer periods of time than we think of humans as being. Yeah. And what's great about this is that you have the juxtaposition is so strong because really the only stationary object is him. And then everything else, including parts of his body, moves around him. I also think it's really interesting in terms of color because he does have these elements of the brighter, more saturate, lighter colors, tinging his feathers, but he is very earth tone. And yet when you look at him, he includes all of the colors around him, which also I think makes him very central because he is tying the whole piece together, which is one, difficult to do, and because he's fully integrated, and yet like these have very different energies, and yet within him he contains all of this and comes together as himself, making him extremely strong. So
Thank you. That's the green heron. I don't know if you've ever seen one in like out in the world, but it's an interesting bird in terms of color because it can be really drab.
Yeah.
Until the light hits it, and then it's like there are so many different like iridescences playing, and so it was a fun subject.
when you start laying this out, does it start as this? I always want to say hypercolor, but sometimes when I say hypercolor, people are like, I don't get what you're saying. But when you're like, how does your composition start? When you lay it out, like, what are you doing with the underpainting? At what point do you extrapolate out into this?
That's a great question. Generally, what I will do first is just establish my my values and my general shapes, and just very like broad strokes. And usually, while I'm doing that, some sort of an idea will start to form as far as how the flow should be. And if I get some sort of insight from the canvas, from a stroke that's laid down, get some sort of insight in the direction that the flow should happen, that's when I start adding in circular forms. And those tend to kind of then build upon each other.
Okay.
Which is how, this built. And then from after the values are established, then I kind of will go into this process of like painting some realistic detail in the bird, making sure that the anatomy is right. And then I hate that. And then, and then I'll go back in and try like really playing with color and seeing how far I can push things.
Yeah.
You do a good job of really pushing the color. And I'm looking at, of course, your blues against your oranges, which gives me either a time of day of evening or of morning. And I'm not exactly sure which. I kind of prefer to think evening. What time of day do you think you're producing?
So, yeah, that's really interesting because it was evening when I made this observation. So my own sensory information that I'm working with is from that time of day. But while I'm working, I'm also thinking about, well, there are similar things about morning light too, and how can that come into play here? And then I just kind of reel and like showing all of those things, all of those different times, all the different light that can happen. Yeah.
I also think that that's like a version of a Rorschach test to like determine if you're a morning or evening person. Like she thinks that it looks like sunset because
I like that.
she
I'm not up in the morning.
Not a morning person. She a morning boy.
If you want to be a bird person, you have to be a morning person.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Well, I was going to ask you a little bit about Audubon, because I think people who appreciate Audubon will obviously appreciate your beautiful painting of this bird, and you've taken it that step further.
That's a lovely compliment.
Oh, thank you. But, it deserves it.
So, and if you happen to just always buy things with birds in them, you will also appreciate it.
I love bird art, but it's kind of, I don't know, it can be kind of a stagnant subject, and there's a lot out there, but they're beautiful and they're so multidimensional, and that's what I like to show with my birds.
Well, and also they're so interesting because they are an example of, flat earthers, of evolution and like what happens to something over a long period of time and how adaptive something can be to its environment.
Yeah.
Which I think is really cool, which is also something that you can see in this as an evolution of color and time and things like that. So it all kind of coalesces, which is a terrific word, together in this piece. I really hope that everyone will come see this piece at our space during the jury show from now through May 14th.